The creative team behind Borderlands can now breathe a sigh of relief, as the Crow remake has now taken over the baton for the biggest flop of the year. And considering just how badly it is underperforming even the most pessimistic of expectations, it is likely to stay that way. Borderlands distributor Lionsgate Films is unlikely to pop any champagne though, as they're behind the Crow remake as well. They might be wondering, what went wrong? How could this happen? How could a remake of such a beloved classic flop even worse than Borderlands? In this postmortem, we're about to find out. So let's dive in. Before we can examine what went so disastrously wrong with the remake, let's begin with turning our gaze towards the original. Originally an indie black and white comic by James O'Barr, The Crow is a moody gothic piece about a ghost who returns from the afterlife to avenge the senseless murder of himself and his girlfriend. A story which O'Barr wrote while he was processing the unexpected death of his fiancée, who was killed by a drunk driver. Another writer, John Shirley, came across the comic and wanted to develop it as a feature film, and the project got serious traction once visionary producer Edward R. Pressman came aboard. A producer whose genius still isn't nearly widely enough recognized. Pressman was decades ahead of his time. He had already brought Conan the Barbarian and Masters of the Universe to the big screen, and he was in the process of doing the same for Judge Dredd when he recognized the cinematic potential in the pain and suffering that O'Barr had bled into the pages of The Crow. Seeing the potential in a way that few others did, he pitched the project to highly visual filmmakers who could make the story come alive on screen in a way no one else could. And eventually, Alex Proyas signed on to direct, while Brandon Lee joined as Eric Draven, the Crow himself, and between this and all the other talent, lightning had been caught in a bottle. The rest, of course, is Hollywood history. On March 31st of 1993, in a tragic prop mishap, towards the end of production, Brandon Lee was shot and killed. The event would not only change safety procedures and regulations where film productions are concerned. Long before the movie was released, this event also added a sense of gravitas and notoriety to the movie itself, maybe even a sense of destiny fulfilled due to the Lee family heritage. On top of that, director Alex Proyas made a damn fine film, one which perfectly encapsulated an era of filmmaking that was coming to an end. An era which had also seen movies like 1989's Batman and 1990's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The world, the costumes, photography, music, subject matter, and ultimate fate of Brandon Lee all blended together to make something more than just a movie. The only thing that even remotely compares to what happened with The Crow is Heath Ledger's Joker in 2008's The Dark Knight. But there had been many Jokers before, and there would be many Jokers since. By contrast, Brandon Lee was the first on-screen Crow, and due to the relative obscurity of the source material to the world at large, he was the only Crow. The image of him as the Crow is iconic, and arguably usurped that of the original comic. It is the image of Brandon Lee as the Crow that will forever be connected to the Crow, and which still graces posters, t-shirts, action figures, and statues all over the world to this day. It doesn't matter that a number of direct-to-video sequels to the original were made. As far as the world at large is concerned, they never happened. Brandon Lee is the only Crow. Any remake was always going to be compared with the original, and with it, the image and mythic status of Brandon Lee. That was enough to scare off a number of would-be remakes from fully committing over the years since. The attempts to remake The Crow go back almost 2 decades now, with at least 5 different iterations of would-be remakes having been in some stage of development since 2008. At various points, both Mark Wahlberg, Bradley Cooper, Tom Hiddleston, Alexander Skarsgård, Luke Evans, Norman Reedus, and Jason Momoa have all been attached to star. They all dodged the proverbial bullet, as for one reason or another, all their movies fell apart before they could be humiliated at the box office. Director Rupert Sanders and Bill Skarsgård, brother of the earlier attached Alexander, weren't so lucky. Whenever a movie has been in development hell long enough, or if there are a series of mishaps along the way, Hollywood types will resort to the excuse that the production in question is cursed. Now, always and without exception, this is just a deflection aimed at obscuring the fact that the higher-ups and creatives made inexcusable and boneheaded decisions early on in the process, which came back to haunt them later, when there was no fixing them. In the case of The Crow, the boneheaded decision was attempting a new version at all, even if the pitch always was that they were doing a brand new adaptation of the original comic book, and not a remake of the iconic movie. The problem with that pitch, of course, or rather that excuse, is that this is a case where there is no audience demand for a new adaptation of the original story, an original story that has been usurped by the image of Brandon Lee. No matter how the creatives may try to justify it to themselves and to the rest of the world, they were, for all intents and purposes, remaking a movie that no one wanted to see remade. I mean, in 2019, Alex Proyas, the director of the original, came out and stated that he had tried to stop the remake from happening out of respect for Brandon Lee, saying, "It's not just a movie that can be remade, it's one man's legacy, and it should be treated with that level of respect." And I'm inclined to agree with that. In my book, merely seeing The Crow is tantamount to visiting the grave of a dearly departed celebrity. As such, if there is any production that truly can be labeled as cursed, it is in fact this one, as no matter who directed and who starred, no matter what else it may have gotten right, it was always going to fail due to the iconic status of the original. As it turned out though, the eventual remake actually got nothing right. Not the story, not the casting, not the visuals, nothing, and that made it flop even harder than it otherwise might have. The finished movie was directed by Rupert Sanders, who has always tried to be a visionary director like Alex Proyas, though in my personal opinion, without ever really succeeding. While he directed the pilot for Apple TV's Foundation, as well as the live-action Ghost in the Shell remake, many will remember him most for the Snow White and Huntsman, and the affair he had with Kristen Stewart during the making of that movie. Replacing Brandon Lee as Eric Draven was Bill Skarsgård, incidentally the brother of Alexander, who was associated with the role for a brief moment a decade ago. While Bill has been a working actor for years, he achieved mainstream success with his portrayal of Pennywise in the It remake, a role he reportedly will reprise in the upcoming prequel series for Max, as well as his recent role in John Wick 4. He will next be seen as Count Orlok in the Nosferatu remake, and boy, there's a lot of remakes here. But be that as it may, it's a good thing he has that to fall back on, because if he didn't, The Crow could easily have done to his career what the Green Goblin did to that of once rising star Dane DeHaan. Up until The Crow, Borderlands was the biggest flop of the year, and it flopped so badly that according to the sources of our own Tom Connors, it will be out on digital inside a week, 2 at most. The Crow flopped even worse than that, as the audience flat out rejected it unseen, even more so than they did Borderlands. To put things into perspective, The Crow barely did half of what Borderlands did in Thursday previews, meaning it was already losing screens on Friday, August 23rd, technically its opening day. The movie is on track to open to less than 5 million at the domestic box office, which is a disaster, even for a movie with a listed budget of only 50 million. For comparison, the last theatrically released Crow film, City of Angels, the original sequel that bombed upon release back in 1996, made 9.7 million in its opening weekend around the same time period, only that was in $1996 and with 1996 ticket prices. Adjust that for inflation and price hikes, and the opening weekend for this movie is looking really bad. The only saving grace for Lionsgate is that their exposure is only 10 million of the budget and 15 million in marketing and release, the sum total of which is less than they spent on the marketing for Borderlands alone. And that they spent a mere 15 million marketing The Crow suggests that they knew they had another bomb on their hands and allocated the contractual minimum only. As such, while The Crow may be the bigger bomb, Lionsgate will still lose more on Borderlands. But back to The Crow. The remaining losses will be absorbed by the various other international distributors who were stupid enough to buy into this, as the international pre-sales make up the rest of the budget. And here's the kicker. Because of those pre-sales, the main production companies involved in making the actual movie may walk away without any losses. Because just like Secret Hideout and Bad Robot, in a style reminiscent of The Producers, someone else took on the risk, while they, if nothing else, got their extensive production fee, which was baked into the budget. That's Hollywood for you, I guess. Let me know your thoughts on all of this, as well as on the movie itself, in the statistically unlikely event that you saw it, in the comments.